Clint Walker and Jack Elam shared a unique bond both on and off the screen, having starred together in Western classics. They were more than just co-stars, they were close friends. But when Jack Elam passed away in 2003, fans were shocked to find Clint absent from his funeral, leaving many to wonder what could have kept Clint from saying goodbye to someone he held so dear. First, let's talk about how Clint Walker comes into the picture, and why his relationship with Jack Elam took such an unexpected turn later in life. Jack Elam was born in 1920 in a tiny mining town called Miami, Arizona. It's one of those places you've probably never heard of, about 85 miles from Phoenix. His dad Millard worked all sorts of jobs. He was a carpenter, a millman, and even an accountant. Life wasn't exactly easy for the Elam family. By the time Jack was just 4 years old, they'd already moved from Miami to a nearby place called Globe, Arizona. Tragedy struck the family not long after that in 1924, when Jack was only 4. His mother, Alice Amelia, passed away, the cause a disease they called general paralysis back then. But it's likely that she suffered from something much worse, a condition that had already plagued her for 3 long years. Imagine being that young and losing your mother to something so terrible. Jack and his older sister Emerid were left without their mom. After Alice's death, Jack and his sister were shuffled around, living with different family members. It wasn't an easy time for any of them then. In 1928, when Jack was 8, his dad remarried. His new stepmother, Flossie Vanny, came from Kansas. Flossie was a public school teacher, so there was at least some stability coming into their lives. By 1930, the whole family, including Flossie's own mother, was living together in Globe. Millard had taken up a job as an investigator for a loan company, and things seemed to be looking up a little. Even young Jack Contry contributed, working on nearby farms whenever he could, picking cotton to help make ends meet. But life wasn't done throwing curveballs at Jack just yet. In 1931, Jack was only 11 years old when he got into a fight with another boy. And this wasn't just any scuffle. This one ended with a pencil being jammed into Jack's left eye. Can you imagine a fight at a Boy Scout meeting of all places, and it leaves him blind in one eye for the rest of his life? That kind of injury doesn't just heal up nicely. They tried to help, but the damage was done. Eventually, they had to remove the lens of his left eye, making it permanently sightless. Jack would later talk about how it started to drift. That's why you get that cockeyed look he became famous for. But let's not get ahead of ourselves now. If you've ever watched Jack Elam in a movie or a TV show, you know that eye became his trademark. It gave him a look that you couldn't forget. But in those early days, it was just a kid's misfortune. Jack himself would later joke about it, saying, "I lost my eye when I was 11 in a fight at," would you believe it, a Boy Scout meeting. It was a big initiation night, but I got into a scrap with this other kid and he put a pencil through my eye. No doctor was around right away, so his eye didn't get treated properly for a while. By the time they did something, it was too late. Jack said it took about 20 years for his eye to start drifting around. At one point, when he was working on the movie Rawhide in 1951. Jack told Daryl Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, that he could get the eye fixed, but Zanuck told him not to do it. "It's part of your mystique," he said. And you know what? Zanuck was right. That lazy eye became part of what made Jack Elam such a memorable actor. But let's not pretend it didn't cause him some trouble too. Jack talked about how sometimes he was a little off-center when talking to people because of the eye, but by that time, it had just become part of who he was. Let's pause on the whole cockeyed actor thing for a second, and talk about Jack's life before he ever thought about being in movies. After all, he didn't start out dreaming of Hollywood. He had some pretty normal jobs. First, he finished high school in Arizona, and then moved out to California. There he got married and went to college, majoring in business studies. But during that time, he wasn't just focused on school. Jack worked all kinds of jobs. He was a salesman, an accountant for Standard Oil, a bookkeeper at Bank of America, and even managed the Hotel Bel-Air in Los Angeles. That last one is a pretty fancy gig for a guy like Jack. Then, like a lot of men from his generation, Jack served in the military during World War II. He was in the U.S. Navy for 2 years, which is impressive, considering he was blind in one eye. After the war, Jack went back to working in business. He became a well-known independent auditor in Hollywood, doing financial work for companies like Samuel Goldwyn Productions and even Hopalong Cassidy Productions. He was basically the guy keeping track of the books for big-time film mogul. But here's where life threw him another curveball. The long hours spent reading and checking all those financial records put way too much strain on his good eye, the only one he could actually see out. He told a reporter once that his good eye kept going shut. And no wonder. Can you imagine spending hours every day hunched over financial records with only one working eye? Eventually his doctor told him he had to quit that line of work immediately, or else he'd go blind completely. So Jack found himself at a crossroads. He couldn't do the job he'd been doing for years, and with only one good eye, he had limited options. That could have been the end of the story right there. But instead, It was just the beginning. Jack took the risk and pivoted to something completely different, acting, and man, did that work out for him. He might have thought his lazy eye was a problem, but Hollywood saw it as gold. Jack Elam made his big screen debut in 1949 with a movie called She Should Have Said No. It wasn't exactly a blockbuster, more of an exploitation film, the kind of thing that was meant to shock people. The story followed a chorus girl whose life falls apart because she smokes marijuana. It's not just her career that goes down the drain, but her brother ends up taking his own life too. For the next decade, Jack kept getting cast in similar roles, gangster films, westerns, anything where he could play the bad guy. And let's be honest, he was really good at it. He had that rough look, especially with his crooked eye, and it made him stand out. By the time the 1950s were wrapping up, folks were calling Jack the screen's most loathsome character. That's not something you hear every day, but in Hollywood it meant Jack was doing something right. If a movie needed a villain, Jack was the guy you called now. If you were watching TV in the 1950s or 1960s, you would have seen Jack pop up all over the place, especially in westerns. He made guest appearances on shows like The Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Rawhide, and pretty much every other western series out there at the time. Jack had this ability to make even the simplest villain feel larger than life, and people loved it. He could sneer, swagger, and scowl better than most, and it's what kept him busy in the industry for years. One of the more unique roles Jack took on was in an episode of The Twilight Zone. In 1961, the episode was called Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up, and Jack played a slightly unhinged bus passenger. It wasn't a western or a gangster flick, but it showed that Jack could do more than just bad guys in cowboy boots. Then there was Lawman, a western TV show, where Jack got a chance to play a character named Paul Henry in an episode called Clootie Hutter. This was a bit different for Jack because even though he still played a tough guy, the story showed a bit more depth. His character wasn't sure if he should believe a woman's story about how his brother died instead of immediately going for revenge. He hesitated, unsure about her involvement. This added a layer to his usual villain role and showed that he could handle more complex characters. In 1963, Jack got a rare opportunity to play the good guy. He was cast as a reformed gunfighter in the series. The DTAs, the show didn't last long. Only 19 episodes, but for Jack, it was a chance to step out of his usual bad guy shoes. Later that year, he played a U.S. Marshal in another Western series, called Temple Houston this time. He was George Tager, a former gunfighter who had turned his life around even though he was used to playing villains. Jack showed he could be just as convincing on the other side of the law. In 1966, Jack Elam took on something completely different from his usual villain roles. He was cast in The Night of the Grizzly, a Western film starring Clint Walker. This was a big deal because it was Jack's first comedic role, and he got to show people that he wasn't just a bad guy. He could make them laugh too. The movie was released by Paramount Pictures, and it was directed by Joseph Pevney, who ended up making this his last feature film. The story of The Night of the Grizzly was pretty classic for a Western. Clint Walker played Marshal Big Jim Cole, who decides he's had enough of the dangerous life of being a lawman and moves his family to Wyoming to start over as a rancher. But as you'd expect in a Western, it's not exactly smooth sailing. Right after they settle in, all kinds of trouble come their way. A giant murderous grizzly bear, vengeful neighbors, and an outlaw from Big Jim's past who's out for revenge. The film had a great cast with actors like Martha, Heyer, and Keenan Wynn, but it's Jack Elam's performance as Hank that stood out. Hank was one of those comedic characters that added some lightness to all the serious danger Big Jim was facing. Jack showed that he could be funny, quirky, and still deliver that wild energy he was known for. It was a nice change from his usual bad guy roles, and it helped people see him in a new light. Now Clint Walker, who played the lead, was one of those larger-than-life Hollywood stars known for his towering height and deep voice. Walker had already made a name for himself in shows like Cheyenne, so he was the perfect choice to play the hero in The Night of the Grizzly. But despite the difference in their roles, Clint as the strong, silent hero, and Jack as the eccentric comic relief, the two actors developed a real bond on set. Jack and Clint hit it off. They were both tough guys with noons attitudes, but they also had a sense of humor about things. It wasn't the kind of Hollywood friendship you'd read about in the tabloids, but they shared mutual respect and worked well together. But their relationship wasn't all just on-screen chemistry. It went deeper than that. And as we'll see, it played a major role in the years to come, especially when Jack passed away and Clint made the surprising decision not to attend his funeral in 1967, just after his role in The Night of the Grizzly. Jack Elam was cast in another Western called The Way West. This time he played Preacher Weatherby, a much lighter and funnier character than his usual villain roles. He shared the screen with Hollywood heavyweights like Robert Mitchum, Richard Widmark, and Kirk Douglas in a story about a wagon train making its way through the Oregon Trail. Jack Roll added a bit of humor to the adventure, and it showed again that he could handle more than just being the bad guy. Then in 1968, Jack had a small but memorable part in Sergio Leone's famous spaghetti western Once Upon a Time in the West, if you've seen it. You might remember Jack's character as one of the 3 gunslingers sent to kill Charles Bronson's character at a dusty train station. Jack spent most of his screen time in that scene trying to swat away a pesky fly, and in the end, he trapped it inside his gun barrel. It was a classic Jack Elam moment, funny without saying a word, and still managing to keep that tense western feel after that. In 1969, Jack took on another comedic role in Support Your Local Sheriff alongside James Garner. This movie was a huge hit, and Jack's performance as a bumbling sidekick helped push him further into comedy. 2 years later, he and James Garner teamed up again for Support Your Local Gunfighter. By this point, Jack wasn't just the villain anymore. People were starting to see him as a go-to guy for comic relief, and it worked. His tough guy image paired with his knack for comedy made him a standout. In both movies, the director of both films, Burt Kennedy, saw Jack's comedic potential early on and ended up casting him in 15 different projects. In the mid-1970s, he landed a part in the Texas Wheelers playing Zach Wheeler, a long-lost father who returns home to raise his kids after their mother dies. While the show didn't last long, it showed a softer, more paternal side of Jack that wasn't often seen on screen by the late 1970s. Jack was continuing to land unique roles. He played Frankenstein's monster in Struck by Lightning, a sitcom that didn't last more than 3 episodes. But his comedic streak continued with roles like Dr. Nicholas Van Heeling, a crazed proctologist in the Sea Cannonball Run, and its sequel, Cannonball Run 2, in 1986. Jack starred in the film The Aurora Encounter, where he became friends with Mickey Hayes, a young boy with Proera. Their friendship was so strong that a documentary was made about it titled I Am Not a Freak. It showed a side of Jack that wasn't just about acting. He genuinely cared about the people he met along the way, and Mickey left a lasting impression on him. Jack's final years in show business saw him continue to appear in smaller roles like an episode of Home Improvement in 1992, but his health was starting to decline in 1994. He was honored with an induction into the Hall of Great Western Performers in Oklahoma City. It was a fitting tribute for a man who had given so much to the Western genre throughout his long career. On a personal note, Jack was married twice. His first wife, G. Lise Hoder, passed away from colon cancer. In 1961, later that year, Jack married Margaret M. Jennison, and they stayed together for over 40 years. Jack Elam passed away in 2003 at the age of 82 from congestive heart failure in Ashland, Oregon. Though he's gone, his legacy as one of Hollywood's most iconic villains and eventually a comedic force lives on. When Jack Elam passed away, many people expected Clint Walker, his longtime friend and co-star, to attend the funeral. But when the day came, Clint Walker was absent, and this left many wondering why the main reason Clint didn't go to Jack's funeral had to do with his own health. By that time, Clint was in his mid-70s and dealing with some serious heart issues. He had a history of heart trouble that dated back to a near-death experience. In 1971, while skiing at Mammoth Mountain, Clint was involved in a freak accident where he was impaled by a ski pole, causing his heart to stop for a brief period. He was even pronounced dead before miraculously being revived. But that incident left Clint's heart vulnerable, and it was something he had to manage very carefully from then on. Clint's doctors had advised him to avoid any situations that could cause significant emotional or physical stress. Funerals, especially for someone as close to him as Jack, would have been emotionally overwhelming. On top of that, the travel required to attend the funeral posed another risk. Clint was on a strict regimen to manage his heart condition, and the combination of grief stress and the strain of traveling could have pushed his heart past its limits. He knew that going to Jack's funeral might very well have put his life in danger. In a later interview, Clint expressed how difficult that decision was for him. He said missing Jack's funeral was one of the hardest choices he'd ever had to make. Jack wasn't just a co-star, he was a friend on the sets they worked on together. Jack was always up to something funny. Clint recalled a story about Jack pretending to have a terrible cold on set, tricking a young stand-in by flicking water at her after sneezing. Jack had this goofy, mischievous side that made everyone laugh. That's the kind of memory Clint held on to after Jack's death. Despite not attending the funeral, Clint found his own way to honor his friend. He took time to remember the good times they shared, like how Jack could turn any situation into a joke, or how they never had a dull moment while filming together. Clint believed that Jack would have understood his decision to prioritize his health. After all, Jack had his own share of health struggles later in life, and knew what it was like to make tough choices when it came to well-being. In the end, Clint Walker chose to honor Jack Elam by keeping their memories alive in his heart rather than risking his health to be physically present at the funeral. Their bond was one of mutual respect and shared adventures, and Clint knew that Jack wouldn't have wanted him to put his life in danger just to attend the service. It was a decision made out of necessity, but one Clint clearly struggled with knowing how much Jack meant to him.